The ship split the sky like a silver needle drawing a sharp line across the clouds. It hovered, humming with power, above the United World Government Complex, casting a long, elliptical shadow over the courtyard fountain. People had gathered, despite the warnings, pressing against barricades with phones raised, ready to film their first glance at the Alarian Forcer. A few vendors had even appeared, peddling shirts that read, "I was briefly terrified at the first contact event," in garish fonts. Jackson Reed wasn't in the crowd. He was late. He was always late, especially for things involving paperwork or, in this case, interstellar political integration. He jogged up the front steps, clutching a lopsided briefcase and a half-eaten protein bar, nearly colliding with a woman in a full exosuit. She hissed a profanity in Mandarin and shoved past him. Jackson, unoffended, gave her a thumbs up and kept going. Inside, security was tight and everyone was tense, the kind of tense you get when someone might vaporize your spleen for looking at them wrong. Jackson passed through 3 biometric scans, 2 DNA samplers, and 1 oddly personal mind scan that made him feel judged for that thing he did at a bachelor party 5 years ago. By the time he entered the conference chamber, the Alari envoy was already there. She stood at the head of the obsidian table, flanked by 2 guards in armor that shimmered like oil on water. Her uniform was severe and tailored, her stance coiled like a blade sheathed in decorum. Her skin had the faint shimmer of iridescence, her posture imperial, and her long ears swept back like the wings of a falcon. She radiated unapproachability, the kind that made even seasoned diplomats sit up straighter. Jackson stopped halfway to the table. She hadn't noticed him yet, probably because she was focused on the giant transparent data screen floating before her, which displayed Earth's planetary offenses in sharp Alari glyphs, most of which translated to things like inefficient waste management or excessive radio wave pollution. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and clear, each word falling like an edict. "You have used plastic straws in oceanic regions classified as ecological recovery zones." Jackson cleared his throat. "Only like 2% of us. The rest of us just use those sad paper ones that dissolve before you finish your drink." Her head turned. She looked at him for the first time. For someone bred for war and duty, her eyes were disturbingly expressive. There was a flicker of something, surprise maybe, before it vanished under a fresh layer of imperious disdain. "You are the liaison," Jackson offered a lopsided smile and extended a hand. "Jackson Reed, civilian liaison and part-time sandwich critic. You can call me Jack, but most people just call me by accident when they're trying to reach tech support." She did not take his hand. "Captain Valai of the Alari Dominion," she said, as if the name alone should rearrange the furniture in respect. "I am here to audit and ensure your species' compliance with Dominion protocols." "Awesome. I brought snacks," Jackson said, pulling a crumpled bag of puffed algae chips from his coat. "They taste like despair, but in a nostalgic way." No reaction. Her ears flicked slightly, though. He couldn't tell if that meant amusement or homicidal intent. Valai resumed her list. "You have failed to regulate terrestrial climate zones, contributing to destabilizing the planetary atmosphere. Your satellite orbits are erratic and poorly maintained. Your primary data network hosts over 200,000 hours of visual content devoted to a creature known as the Slippery Banana Man." Jackson raised a finger. "Technically, only 80,000 of those are original content. The rest are reposts." Valai stared at him. Her silence was like the space between stars. Vast, cold, slightly judgmental. He shrugged. "Just saying." She pressed a control on her wrist cuff. A sphere the size of a basketball floated into view, projecting real-time data feeds, environmental analytics, and a 3-dimensional model of Earth's orbit. Jackson watched for a moment, chewing on his algae chip. "You ever think this whole galaxy might just be a group project? And Earth's that one kid who forgot the deadline?" he asked. Valai blinked. Her mouth parted, only slightly. She didn't respond. Not with words. But her gaze didn't have that annihilation gleam anymore. Just a puzzled glint, like she'd stumbled upon a new species of bug that smiled and made puns. "You are flippant," she said at last. "Professionally," Jackson replied, "also helps me not panic when I'm sitting across from someone who could rip a hole through a battleship with a butter knife." That oddly did something. Attention shifted. It wasn't visible, but the silence that followed wasn't the same as before. It was warmer, maybe, or at least not actively freezing. She resumed speaking, but the cadence had softened by a degree. You will escort me through all primary and secondary administrative centers, explain compliance shortcomings, and assist in corrective measures. Sure thing. You want that with a side of fries or planetary unrest? Vilai didn't respond, but her eyes lingered a moment too long. And then, as if recalling the proper amount of emotional detachment, she turned briskly toward the corridor. They walked side by side through the facility. Jackson tried to keep up with her precise military gait, but he kept tripping over his own shoelaces. At one point he muttered, "I swear these things are conspiring against me." And she made a sound that might have been a laugh, or a suppressed cough. Security officers and diplomats stared as they passed, mouths slightly open. Jackson leaned toward Vilai and whispered, "I think they expected you to arrive riding a flaming war beast." "I'm kind of disappointed too." "I do not require war beasts to establish dominance," Vilai replied without breaking stride. "Sure, but imagine the merch." They entered a room lined with holographic charts showing Earth's energy use. Vilai scrutinized every statistic, questioning every variance, every spike. Jackson explained most of them as best he could, but eventually ran out of knowledge and started improvising. "This dip here? That's when the global power grid overloaded because someone tried to stream all 12 seasons of Space Hospital in 4D. You are making this up." "Am I?" "You are," he grinned. "Yeah, but admit it. For a second, you doubted yourself." Vilai didn't answer, but her ear twitched again. As the day dragged on, she never once sat down. She never showed fatigue. She asked, demanded, evaluated. And Jackson just kept being Jackson, witty, relaxed, oddly insightful at the strangest moments. When she mentioned Dominion ethics codices, he asked if they had any footnotes about empathy. When she rattled off efficiency ratios, he suggested measuring joy as part of the productivity index. The sun was setting when they reached the rooftop garden, a rare patch of green meant to demonstrate sustainable design. Vilai stood still for a long time, looking at the flora. Her expression, so carefully armored all day, shifted again, subtly. Then she turned toward him. "You are different from the others." "I moisturize," Jackson replied. For a moment she said nothing. Then against all expectation she asked, "Do you always speak like this?" "Only when I'm awake." She stared at him, and he stared back. And then, just as the wind rustled the alien flowers at their feet, he said, "You know, you're kind of beautiful when you scowl like that." Silence. It hit like a comet, sudden and wide. Her face didn't change. Not exactly, but something in her eyes flickered. The silence lasted a beat too long. "I beg your pardon?" she said. Jackson blinked. "I mean, just an observation, a compliment. Sorry, was that inappropriate? I can go back to talking about satellite failures if you want." She looked away. Her jaw tightened, but not in anger. Something else. She stepped back, just slightly, as if recalibrating her entire frame of reference. "No one has spoken to me like that," she said, her voice quieter than it had been all day. Jackson scratched the back of his neck. "Well, now someone has." And then, without another word, Vilai turned and walked away. Not quickly, not sharply, just walked. Jackson stood there, the garden buzzing softly around him, wondering what he'd just done. The next morning, Jackson arrived at the administrative compound 5 minutes early, a feat so rare it nearly triggered a security lockdown. The guards at the main gate glanced at him with suspicion, as if punctuality might be contagious. He waved his badge, offered one a bite of his breakfast burrito, was politely refused, and strolled through humming with more caffeine than blood. He half expected to be turned away. After all, he'd broken some kind of invisible protocol the day before, saying something human and stupid to someone whose species treated emotional detachment like a constitutional right. Vilai was already waiting in the same room, back ramrod straight, fingers clasped behind her. She didn't acknowledge his presence when he entered, nor when he said, "Morning, Captain. Sleep okay, or did you just glare at the stars until they blinked first?" Her silence was a kind he was starting to interpret. Not angry, just calculating. She studied him out of the corner of her eye, like she was trying to decide if he was an anomaly, a threat, or just an inconveniently ambulatory curiosity. He pulled up a second chair and plopped into it. So today's the big tour of the water reclamation centers. It's every bit as glamorous as it sounds. She turned toward him slowly. Explain your behavior yesterday. Oh, that. You mean the compliment? I mean the interruption, the unauthorized statement, the personal comment directed at a high-ranking Dominion officer? He rubbed his chin. You mean when I said you were beautiful? Her eyes narrowed and her ears did that twitch again. Yeah, that, he continued. That was mostly because I was thinking it and didn't have the good sense to keep my mouth shut. Happens to me around street food and emotionally repressed aliens alike. Valai's jaw clenched. You do not comprehend the implications of your words. Jackson scratched his temple. That's fair. But also, I think maybe you don't comprehend the implications of hearing something nice every once in a while. No offense. She didn't blink. The silence stretched again. He sipped his synth coffee. She stared at him like he was some unclassified life form that had wandered into a restricted sector and declared itself a motivational speaker. We will proceed with today's agenda, she said at last. Sure. And for the record, still not taking it back. She strode ahead, not waiting to see if he followed. He did, matching her brisk steps with a light bounce in his own, unconcerned that she probably fantasized about turning him into a footnote in a Dominion court transcript. The transport shuttle they took to the reclamation site was sleek and eerily quiet. Valai said nothing the entire ride. Jackson filled the silence by listing bizarre Earth beverages, describing each with increasing absurdity. So then there's pickle soda. Tastes like betrayal and regret. Pretty sure it violates at least 3 Geneva Conventions. She didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched. Once, at the facility, she examined the purification arrays, atmospheric moisture harvesters, and nanofilter turbines with relentless focus. Jackson followed her, explaining in layman's terms how Earth barely scraped by with jury-rigged tech and a whole lot of duct tape. At one point, he pulled open a panel to reveal a motherboard held in place with chewing gum and good intentions. Valai stared at it, then at him. This passed your internal quality assurance? No, but the guy who installed it has a very charming dog. She didn't reply. She just took a picture with her ocular lens implant and muttered something in Alari that might have been a curse or a prayer. Probably both. By noon, the inspection had turned into something else. She still questioned everything, but her tone softened, and her sentences grew longer. She asked how many humans were involved in reclamation efforts, what motivated them, why Earth hadn't switched to Dominion water synthesis protocols. Jackson explained the resistance to off-world tech, the pride in fixing things with their own hands. He talked about climate guilt and redemption projects, and the weird, stubborn hope that maybe they hadn't completely screwed themselves. And somewhere between nanofiber filters and algae-based irrigation systems, Valai asked, "Why are you not afraid of me?" Jackson blinked. "Oh, I am." Terrified. "You move like a missile with legs. But I figure if I'm going to die vaporized, I might as well go out with a good line." She stared at him. He shrugged. "You're not just a symbol, Valai. You're a person. You've got thoughts, feelings, probably a favorite kind of starlight or whatever. Starlight has no flavor. Metaphor, Captain. Learn to dance with it." She turned away before he could see her mouth curve. That evening, back at the compound, Valai called off her security detail. They protested. She dismissed them with a tone that could boil oceans. Jackson met her in the conference lounge, holding 2 cups of what he claimed was the best approximation of real hot chocolate Earth still had. She took it cautiously, sniffed it, sipped. Her eyes widened a fraction. "This is not unpleasant. High praise from a woman who called our orbital satellites drunken space garbage." They sat in near silence, but it wasn't the same as before. It was a quiet with breathing room. Jackson didn't press, and Valai didn't flee. At one point, he told a story about accidentally activating a malfunctioning delivery drone that chased him across 4 city blocks, screaming, "Package acquired." Vilai listened, lips tightly pressed, until finally she let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a scoff. The moment passed quickly. Her posture snapped back to attention. But she looked at him differently now. Not like an errant data point, but like something unexpected that might matter. Later, when they parted, Jackson said, "Hey, for what it's worth, I still think you're beautiful. And not just when you scowl." Vilai's expression didn't change, but her voice dropped. "Your words are difficult to categorize." "Good. That means they're getting through." She didn't answer. But after she walked away, her steps were slower, as if the ground beneath her no longer demanded such rigid control. Elsewhere, in a hidden alcove of Dominion Orbiting Command, a set of sensors logged her biofeedback levels. A sub-AI flagged the anomaly: emotional deviation, unusual cardiac rhythm. It sent a ping to central analysis. Subject Vilai exhibiting signs of divergence. No immediate action was taken. But somewhere in the depths of the Dominion archives, a file was opened, and a new designation was entered. Jackson Reed, emotional contaminant. The final day of Vilai's inspection was far less ceremonious than the others. She didn't arrive with her usual precision. There was no entourage, no sharp command to follow her every step. Instead, she came alone, and when Jackson arrived in the conference hall, she was already there, standing by a window, looking out at the city skyline, her posture softer than it had ever been. For the first time, Jackson didn't have to break the silence. It was there, hanging between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He let it linger, sipping his coffee, watching the first rays of morning sunlight bounce off the towers below. He had learned, in 100 small moments over the past weeks, that this quiet pause was where the real conversations were being held. "You're leaving soon," he said, setting his mug down. The question hung in the air. He wasn't asking. He knew the answer, but it needed to be said, like a closure that hadn't quite happened yet. Vilai didn't look at him. "Yes, you'll go back to your people, to your mission." "I will." There was no bitterness in her voice, no venom, just the bare facts. It made something stir in Jackson's chest. He took a step closer, fighting the instinct to fill the space with jokes or sarcasm. It wasn't needed. Not now. "You know, I thought maybe I'd be relieved when you left," he said, "that we'd go back to normal, just another day of alien audits and environmental reports. But," he let the words trail off, "I guess I'm not." Vilai's ear flicked, almost imperceptibly. "I'm not sure what you want me to say." He smiled, a slow, almost rueful grin. "You don't have to say anything. I think I figured it out. I think I understand why you don't let anyone in." He looked at her, really looked at her, noticing the slight tremor in her hand as she held the datapad. She was always in control, always so measured, but today she was human. He couldn't help but admire it. Being strong is all you've ever known, right? She turned, the cold facade slipping for just a second. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again. "Strength is necessary when weakness is a liability." "I get that," Jackson said, leaning against the table, his tone lighter than it felt. "But you know, if everyone around you is weak, you end up alone. Even the strongest person can't lift themselves up forever." Her gaze didn't waver, but something in her softened. She set the datapad down, and for a moment, the professional Alari officer, the relentless warrior, was just Vilai. A person standing in the same room as him, breathing the same air. Jackson had expected the emotional standoff to continue, expected her to retreat into the stoic mask she wore so effortlessly. But today was different. "You've made it harder," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "This softness." He chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not softness. It's just real. You don't have to wear armor every second. It's okay to just be." The silence stretched again, but now it was warm, comfortable. And then, unexpectedly, Vilai smiled. It wasn't wide and it wasn't easy, but it was there. A slight curling of the edges of her lips, almost imperceptible. It was enough. "So what now?" she asked. "What happens next?" Jackson ran a hand through his hair, not quite sure. The days that followed Vilai's arrival had been a whirlwind of unexpected revelations. There was the diplomatic paperwork, of course, and the endless data reports. But beyond that, something else had changed. He had come to understand that Valai was more than just a symbol of alien power, more than just a face of an empire that Earth had feared for years. She was a person. She had vulnerabilities. She had fears. And somewhere along the way, she had let him see them. "I don't know," he said slowly, "but I don't think I'm going to let you leave without getting some answers." Her eyebrow arched slightly. "Answers?" "Yeah," he said, his voice taking on a teasing tone. "Like why you always look like you're about to blow up a planet when I make a joke. And why the hell you never let anyone get close." "Maybe I don't like people to ask questions I'm not ready to answer," she replied, but there was no sharp edge to her words. They were just two people talking, finally speaking, without the weight of their roles pressing down on them. Valai didn't have an answer to that. Instead, she walked to the window, standing with her hands clasped behind her, looking out at the vast city below. Jackson joined her, standing side by side in silence for a few moments. The moment was interrupted by a faint chime. Valai reached for her wrist device, glancing down at the message with a sharp inhale. It was a communique from her fleet, orders to return. The mission was nearly over. "Well, looks like the universe isn't going to pause for us," she said, a hint of regret in her voice. "Yeah," Jackson said with a half smile. "Does it ever?" Valai turned to face him again, her eyes no longer cold, no longer calculating. There was something human in them now, something tender. "I think I owe you one last thing." He raised an eyebrow. "A thank you?" She tilted her head slightly, then surprised him with the softest of smiles. "A promise. I'll consider your perspective. When I go back." Jackson's smile widened, a mixture of amusement and disbelief. "I think that's about as good as I'm going to get, huh?" "It's better than you think." The air between them was no longer tense. It wasn't even strained. For the first time, it felt like two people, two beings who had crossed the vastness of space and time just to understand each other, if only for a moment. And for Jackson, that was enough, more than enough. He offered his hand, half expecting the usual dismissive reaction. But instead, Valai surprised him again. She took it, firm but not crushing, her grip steady, as if she had finally found someone who could stand beside her, without crumbling under the weight of her world. "I'll be watching," she said with a grin, a little playful this time. "Earth performance, the plastic straws, the satellite crashes, all of it. I'm counting on you to call us out when we mess up," Jackson replied with a grin of his own. "We could use the feedback." They shared one last look, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Valai's ship would leave soon, and the mission would end. But something had shifted. The vast expanse of space between them no longer felt so distant. It felt smaller, more connected. As she walked toward the door, Jackson couldn't help but call out, "Hey, Valai!" She stopped, turning her head just slightly. "Don't forget the starlight," he said. "It's got flavor. You just have to taste it." For a long moment she stood silent, and then finally she nodded. "Goodbye, Jackson Reed," she said. "Until next time," he replied, watching as the woman who could shatter a planet with her mind and whose heart now felt just a little bit less distant, walked out of the room. And for the first time in a long time, Jackson felt at peace.